All right, welcome everybody to our webinar on RRIFs. Really happy to have you here today. We have a big list of people that have signed up, so we're just going to give everybody a moment to filter in. Usually takes a couple of minutes, and then we'll get started. So again, thanks again for joining our webinar on RRIFs. We're just giving everybody a second to filter in, and then we'll do some introductions, and then we'll get into the education, and then we'll take your questions as well. So we're really excited to have you guys here.
I guess while we're waiting, I just wanted to give a shout out to Barbara and Peter and Dennis and Karen, who I see are on the, and Irina, who are on the waiting on the attendance list. So thank you for joining us. It's getting to that stage in our lives where this becomes an issue. So it's good. Anyways, I'll wait and see if there's a few more attendees.
Yeah, thanks to David and Marcia, Marty, Maurice, Thomas, and Rick. Thanks for joining. We've got a good list now. So I think we'll get started. There'll be a few more people joining as we go along, but we'll catch up as we go through. So here's a pretty picture of retirement, just in case everybody was wondering what the topic is here. And yes, Tom, you're right. If you cannot stay for this call, totally fine. Or if you need to jump because your cat's having a cat emergency, that's okay. We will be emailing out a recording of this call afterwards, so you can enjoy that joke multiple times. So not a problem, or lack thereof, whatever. This is a little, just a bit about us before we get into the nuts and bolts. This is our team. So me, I'm the second guy there talking. I'm Per Homer. We are a financial advisory team with Assante Wealth Management. We're the WWH Financial Group. Many of you on this call are existing clients, and some of you are not, but you're very welcome here. And we're just going to introduce ourselves a little bit. Jeff Wachman is our team founder and has been guiding many of us for many, many years. We won't quite say how long, but you can see we have over 50 years of combined financial markets experience. So between Jeff and I, you can do the math yourself. Erik is also on the call. Erik Wachman joined us a few years ago, and he is another financial advisor on the team. So all three of us work very closely. But the real brain trust and the people who keep the lights on are Ose and Leah. I'm going to let Jeff talk a little bit as well at this point, and then we'll get into a little bit what a financial plan is, and then we'll talk about RRIFs, which is the sujet du jour.
Right. Okay. So this is just a quick intro, because we don't like to waste too much time on the background information for the financial planning focus that we've had over 20 years now, working with many of our clients, and some are on the call. The logical conclusion is when you start to use your savings as a source of income in retirement. So there's implications or considerations, I suppose, that we want to make you aware of, and that's part of our responsibility as financial planning teams that affect your cash flow, obviously, and affect your estate. So these questions are pertinent, and we've worked with many clients who are now living from the proceeds of their savings on a regular basis. In other words, they're receiving income or a salary from their savings, which is the end result of really solid and successful financial planning throughout their life. And so hopefully we will provide some insight to the issues that you should be aware of, and not add complication, but simplify your decision-making process so that you have a clear mind, and you're at peace with the decisions that have to be made going forward. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Per, and Erik will proceed through the presentation.
Thank you so much. Barbara, I hear that you're having some difficulty with the sound. I have taken my headphones off. That may have been causing some rubbing against my shirt of the microphone, but if it sounds like the audio is out of sync, Unfortunately, the only good solution is to log out and log back in again. So that's really the best solution if it's not solving itself. If anybody else is having difficulty with the audio, please put your comments in the chat or the Q&A.
Yeah, I see. Tara, I just to interrupt you. I see Barbara was logged in twice, so that might have caused the problem. Now she's back.
That'll get you every time for sure.
Yeah.
Listen, if you have any questions or comments and you want us to address it throughout the presentation, please throw them up in the chat or the Q&A right away. We're very happy to help and answer those as we go along. And there'll also be a point at the end for questions as well. So again, this is kind of what part of this presentation is part of what we do as a team, which is financial planning. It's our focus. We look at if you have a business or a corporation, we'll say, how have you set up your corporation? How is it running? Is it efficient? How are you paying yourself out of it? For everybody, we look at your net worth. Where are you? Where are your assets? How much debt do you have? How do you manage that? We look at your cash flow. How is your spending? Are you spending we don't really change your spending very much, but we'll look at things like, kind of financial spending or mortgage payments and so forth and optimize that. We plan for education. And in this case, this presentation is very germane towards retirement. We help you manage your investments. We help you minimize and pay the right amount of tax. We look at life and health insurance if that's needed. And really importantly, for all our clients, and this applies to pretty much everybody eventually in their lives, we make sure that everybody has wills that are appropriate for them. So that's kind of what financial planning is. And that's what we do. And so what we've tried to do, as many of you know, is we've tried to create a bunch of webinars that we think are educational and interesting for our clients and others, and just try and put the good word out there. So we do have some other webinars coming up that will come after this one. And if you're on this webinar, you will get invites to them, so not to worry. But we have a new family planning checklist for the people who aren't super interested in RRIFs, the younger people amongst us. For those that have businesses, 5 things that employers need to know about COVID with Sarah Meinhout from North Star HR Systems. And then in early November, we have Keith Masterman speaking with us again. He tends to speak with us about once a year, and he's a phenomenal presenter. He's talking about estate planning, powers of attorney, and he calls it Expose My Six Pack. So that'll be one not to be missed. If you can't make any one of these, just sign up anyways. And we will send you the recording so that you have that after the fact. All right, let's get to the meat of it. So acronyms are phenomenal apparently in financial planning and in business and investments. People love acronyms, as we know. And so there's 2 different acronyms we're going to basically talk about. One is RRSPs and the other is RRIFs. Some of this may be very obvious to all of you, but really I just want to go through this again quickly so everybody is on the same page. So before we hit 71 or before we retire, a lot of Canadians, most Canadians will have RRSPs, which stands for Registered Retirement Savings Plan. The way an RRSP works is when you invest money in an RRSP, the investments that are in your RRSP grow tax-free. As well, when you make contributions to your RRSP, as most of us know at this point, you get a reduction in your taxes. You get your RRSP deduction, and it reduces the amount of taxes you have to pay. Many people end up getting refunds then, which they enjoy. In the RRSP, really flexible. You can invest in a wide array of investments, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc. So that's all great. But when you do take money out of your RRSP, it is taxable and it counts as income. So if I was to take $10,000 out of my RRSP right now, I'm basically going to increase my income by $10,000 and I have to pay extra tax on that, obviously. And you get a slip called a T4 RRSP. A couple exceptions to that for if you're a first-time home buyer or if you are going back to school to do, say, a degree or a master's or something like that, but that's not the point of this presentation. The real point of this presentation is this. Okay, so now let's pretend we all have RRSPs, and you probably do if you're interested in a webinar about RRIFs. What happens to that RRSP when you turn 71? And we'll go through that. At age 71, it has to be converted to a RRIF. That's a typo there. Apparently I'm human, so I apologize for that. RRIFs, on the other hand, is what an RRSP graduates or grows up into. So the RRSP is the caterpillar, and then the RRIF is the butterfly. Let's say. So the RRIF stands for Registered Retirement Income Fund. Again, if you leave investments in the RRIF, it grows tax-free, which is great. We like that. You cannot make any further contributions to a RRIF. So your time is over in terms of investing in the RRIF or adding to the RRIF. Again, you can invest in exactly the same things as an RRSP. It's just a different name for a different type of bucket. And again, when you take money out, the withdrawals are taxable. And you get, instead of a T4 RRSP, you get a T4 RRIF slip. And we're going to go through that there are minimums and so forth and rules about how much you have to take out every year. But withdrawals can be programmed and automated, and they're usually set up as either monthly or annual, is how most people do it. So there's some important dates in our lives. So at any time, you can convert an RRSP to a RRIF. At age 55 is the minimum age at which you're allowed to convert a LIF, a LIRA or a locked-in RRSP to a LIF or an RLIF, and we'll come back to that a little bit later, so don't worry about that one. Age 65 is when most people consider retirement age, and that age was picked many years ago because the life expectancy of a male at that time was 67. So the idea was that you were going to retire at 65 and live for 2 years and then pass away at 67. We now know that obviously life expectancy for your average male or female is well into your 80s now, with advances in health and diet and basically just, we live in first world countries, so it's a little different. Age 71 is the age at which you must convert your RRIF to your RRSP to a RRIF by December. And that has to happen the year that you turn 71. So usually what will happen is your bank or your advisor, such as ourselves, will reach out to you and ask you to sign a bunch of papers to do that. You do not need to start taking money out that year. Age 72, the year you turn 72, is the year that you have to start taking money out of your RRIF, LIF, RLIF, etc. Okay. And then the government, because they want to make sure that you pay your taxes, they actually have a minimum amount that you have to take out of your RRIF, RLIF, LIF, all those things. They're all basically different flavors of the same thing. And there's a minimum amount you have to take out every year. So it's based on the amount that your RRIF was worth at the start of the year. So if my RRIF is worth $100,000 at the start of the year, and I am now turning 72 this year, which is the first year I have to start taking money out, I have to take out 5.4% of that money. So again, my RRIF was worth $100,000. And so I'd have to take out $5,400. I'm forced to do that, and it's declared as income. And you can see that each year, it starts about 4% in your 50s, and each year it goes up a little bit, and then it gets a little more aggressive. And by the time you're 95, the government's forcing you to take out 20% of your account every year. Okay. Now that may or may not be the right amount for you, but that's the minimum that you have to take out, and we'll get into that a little bit further in the presentation too. So again, if you have any questions or comments, just throw them in the chat or the Q&A. Hopefully the audio is working better for Barbara and Peter. Now there is one question here. So remember, this percentage is based on an age. So now you can ask yourself, how old are you? Well, there's one obvious question. If I'm born in 1950, I am turning 72 next year. I'm 71 this year, turning 72 next year. But there is a tweak with the RRIFs, is that you can base your minimum withdrawals on either your own age or your spouse's age. So if I have a spouse who is significantly younger than me, that happens, then I can base it on her age, and that will allow me to basically go a bit to the left on this chart and take one of these smaller percentages. Okay, that may suit me for what I want to do. So it's a discussion, which is why it's important the year that you're turning 71 or even before, have that discussion with your financial advisor about how much is right for you to take out and what age you should use. Generally, me, as a rule of thumb, for RRIFs, right? Not for RLIFs and LIFs, but for RRIFs, I always recommend to take the youngest spouse's age because it affords you the most flexibility. You can always take more than the minimum, but if the minimum is minimum and you don't want to take that much that year, you can't lower it. So always take the youngest spouse for RRIFs. Makes life easier. There's a bunch of different acronyms that I've been throwing out. So again, we talked about RRSPs. RRSPs come from contributions that you made, converts to what's called a RRIF. So that is the most plain vanilla normal way that RRSPs work. And then there's two different other flavors of RRSPs, and they're basically just locked in forms of RRSPs. They come with a bunch of extra rules. And very simply, the first one is called a LIRA. It comes from a provincially regulated pension plan. So if you're working, say, for, I don't know, 123 Corporation, and they have a pension plan and they're a provincially regulated pension plan, when you leave that pension plan, they usually give you a choice. Do you want to leave the money in the pension plan, or do you want to move it to your advisor? If you did the math with your advisor, you decided you wanted to move it to your advisor, it leaves the pension plan and goes into a LIRA. That stands for locked in retirement account. It basically looks, smells, and behaves exactly like an RRSP. The forms are very similar. In fact, they're just different tick boxes on the same form. And when you retire, it converts to a LIF. One of the big differences with a LIRA and a LIF versus an RRSP, especially with a LIRA, is it's harder to take money out. RRSP, at any age, you can take money out of your RRSP and just declare it as income. With a LIRA, you can only take it out at age 55 and above. And there's minimums and maximums about how you can take it out because it's supposed to behave as a pension plan. And we'll get into that in the next slide. Locked in RRSP and locked in RRIF, so which basically is called a RRLIF, because we love acronyms, is almost exactly the same as a LIRA and a LIF. It comes from a federally regulated pension plan, and it converts to the RRLIF. So the difference between a RRIF and let's just use the Ontario LIF here, is that, for example, here, if you recall, we had minimums that you could take out every year, that you were forced to take out every year from your RRIF. And with a case of a RRIF, if I want to take out 100% today, as long as I'm cool with paying the taxes on it, I can totally do that. You're 100% allowed to do that. You have ultimate flexibility above the minimum payout amount. However, on the other hand, with LIFs and RLIFs, there's also another rule, which is the maximum you can take out. And so that's this other gray and orange line here. So you see the orange line, that's the Ontario LIF. So if you have an Ontario regulated pension plan that you convert to a LIRA, you also have, you can take out the minimum, and you also have a maximum. And the idea there is this was coming from a pension plan. It's supposed to provide you kind of a pension-like income. And the government is basically babysitting you and saying that you can't take out all of your money all at once. You need to spread it out over time because you're going to need it in the future. And so that's, a little bit Big Brother-ish, but that's generally the principle behind the way it was created. You do see that the, if you look here, you'll see that the maximum, so that orange line, is over time spreading away from the blue line, which is your minimum. So you do eventually, will be able to take out most of your money. And by the time you're in your late 80s, you can basically liquidate your LIF or RLIF if that's what you wanted to do. So there's a less flexibility in those plans because they did come from pension plans. So it's just something to keep in mind and talk to your advisor about. So people ask, how much should I take? And that's a very personal question. So, it's one of these annoying questions where the answer is, it depends. But I decided I should make some more slides than just that. So first of all, there's a few things we need to think about. And here's some great slides that we got from Fidelity. First of all, in terms of men and women, we know that women take better care of themselves. I'm a guy and I know that we do a lot of stupid things. So in general, a person who is male right now and is age 65 has a 50% chance of living to at least 84. And they also have a 25% chance of living to at least age 90. So when we talk about average life expectancy, You know, people will say that a male age 65 today, their average life expectancy is 84. Well, none of us aspires to be average. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to be average in my life, right? And generally speaking, if you're on this call, you're probably taking better care of your health than the average person, and you probably have a little bit more spunk and vitality to you. So, you know, think about, you know, where that 25% number is and at least plan to there, but beyond. The last thing that Jeff, Erik, and I want is a client coming to us and saying, well, you know, I live past the average life expectancy and I've spent all my money. So we try not to plan for that. Try to plan for success. For women, like I said, we know women take a little bit better care of themselves than men. And also there's some genetics involved. So a woman age 65 right now, if she has a 50% chance of living to at least age 88, and probably at least a 25% chance of living to at least 93. I mean, look at the Queen and her mom. They lived a very long time. Of course, they're in a slightly different income bracket than the rest of us. But if any of you are in that income bracket and you want a financial advisor, just call Jeff or I or Erik. We'd be happy to help you. And then the real thing is that often when we hit age 65, we're together with a spouse, right? And whatever combination that is, but usually we're together with someone and we're planning for retirement together. And so, for example, me and my wife, we're planning, and we're not just planning that, okay, well, Per's going to live this long and Suzanne's going to live this long, so we only need this much. No, I mean, we're planning that we're going to do it together. And we're also planning that whoever survives, which will probably be Suzanne, is that they will have money to last them long enough in life that they never have to worry about money. And that's kind of what the crux of financial planning is. And so the joint probability of living longer for a couple, that at least one person has a 50% chance of living to age 91. So forget all these average life expectancies that you're looking at here at age 65. It's more about, you know, how long will at least one of us live in? It's at least 91. And at least 70, there's at least a 25% chance that at least one of the person will live to 95. And you know what that means? That means that there's another bunch of people that are going to live to 100. So we do need to be really careful to think in this day and age with healthcare the way it is, and it continues improving, that we do need to plan into our mid to late 90s for planning. We cannot say, okay, well, I'm going to go at, you know, my grandma went at, you know, I don't know, 86. And so therefore I'm going to go at 87. It's just not going to work that way. So we do need to be very careful and mindful of that. As well, we need to remember that there's inflation. And of course, right now we're seeing a bit of extra inflation in the economy with, you know, with all the basically free money offered after the COVID disaster. And so if you were, I don't know why Fidelity picked $58,121, but it seems to be a very esoteric number, but that's what they picked. And if I then said, I'm going to go now for 25 years at 2% inflation, that $58,000 becomes $35,000 of today's spending power. So that's kind of the power of inflation taking money away from you. 2% is the number I usually think about because that's the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, and the Federal Reserve in the US. It's all of their basic inflation target. That's where they'd like inflation to be. So that is my base case of what's going to happen. And then Fidelity set out a couple of disaster scenarios as well. So let's say inflation is instead at 4%. So the price of what stuff costs goes up at 4% every year. You know, for what you could get for $58,000 today, that $58,000 is only going to buy you $21,000 of things going forward. So we need to consider inflation as well. So when we do our planning of what the right amount for you is, your "it depends" answer, we do take inflation into account as well. As well, you can also take a look at this chart, and this is this slightly crazy chart from Fidelity, but I think it's really informative, and it tells you, you know, what success rate, if you're taking, how rapidly you're taking money out of your accounts, how long your money will survive. And again, keep in mind this thing that I was saying here about at least one of us is going to live, at least one of us has a 50% chance of living to 91 if we're 65 today. And there's a 25% chance we're going to live to 95. So that, you know, it's a solid amount of years. 95 is 30 years, right? So if we're 65 today and we're taking money out of our account at let's say a 10% rate. So let's say I have $100,000 in my account and I'm going to take out 10%, which is $10,000 a year. And we're going to assume some growth on that money because, you know, Jeff's going to do a really good job investing your money and Erik's going to shepherd it really well. And so we're going to assume that it's growing and so forth. But even then, projections say that at 10% with just a general normal 6-7% rate of return, you're going to run out of money by age 77, 78. So that won't work. So we don't want to do that. And then each of these lines is a different number, obviously. The three lines that make it, the four lines that I'm interested in are the yellow, blue, green, and gray. So those are kind of the ones that you want to go for. Gray is the number that, Jeff Bezos is on, where he doesn't really need to take much of his money at all to live his lifestyle. 2% a year is a little unrealistic for most people. Most people will fall and will find that the number that we calculate for them is kind of in that 4 to 5% range. And that gives the couple a really great opportunity for success in making sure that they've managed their finances for their long term. So basically, if you take this yellow line, you're taking out 5% a year, and that's going to take you to age 97. You've basically then spent your investments, and you still have your home, which you can sell and then use as well. And Jeff.
Yeah, Perry, do you know if that chart is inflation? I don't think it's inflation adjusted, eh?
I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah, I would.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. But thank you. That's a good point. So it's basically got growth and inflation in there. And the idea is that, if I can plan for you to be on this yellow line, so you're 65 today and your investments run out at age 97, ideally we'll have a slightly better experience, but you still have your home, right? And most of us, by the time we're, at 97, the home will be paid off. Hopefully it's paid off by age 65 even. And we know what homes are worth right now. So, my financial stress or my stress over your financial future is very, very low. So somewhere between 4 to 5% a year is the right number. So that's a general rule that we can use. And then what we do is we need to customize it to every individual client. So here's my imaginary friend, Leon, right? And what we do is we say, all right, so you're 50 today, Leon, and you've got some registered accounts, some RRSPs, some TFSAs, and some debt. I guess maybe a small line of credit or something like that. And then you're going to contribute to your RRSPs until you turn 65 and you're going to retire, which is kind of, if you look at this chart, it's going up like this, and then it kind of stops going up aggressively. And that's because Leon stopped contributing to his RRSP. And then what we do is we plan for Leon to continue to take money out of his accounts and fund his lifestyle. And this is basically a net worth chart that will show our clients and show them, this is how we project that you're going to get there. And this is, oops, sorry, that's not what I wanted to do yet. And this is how we're going to project and see, how do you get to age 94? This chart is cut off at age 94. You'll probably see that if we ran this out to 100, so because right now it's going up and then it's going like this, it'll probably start dropping towards 0 as we get to 100, but we want to make sure that we still have a bit of money left there. And so that's part of the financial planning that Eric, Jeff, and I do for our clients. And then we update that regularly as we go along and try and keep people on track. So that's what's your right number. So also on these withdrawals, there is tax on it. So, the tax man will get you coming and going. We all know that. On your minimum withdrawals, so if we go back to that chart here, this one, where you remember these are the minimums you have to take out. So on my $100,000 RIF, I'm 72. I have to take 5,400 out of my RRSP. Great. And the government does not require Assante to withhold, or any other dealer or advisor or bank, to withhold any tax on that. So what that means is if you, Mr. Client, you come to Leon, our friend there, comes to me and says, Per, I've got $100,000 in my RIF. I'm 72. I want to take out my minimum, my $5,400. I said, great. And he says, I don't want to pay any tax on it. I'm like, okay, well, you don't have to pay any tax right now. Here's your $5,400. But what's going to happen is you get your T4 RIF, and at tax time, you still have to pay your taxes. And so if we're taking out the minimum withdrawal and we're not withholding any tax, then we're taking, you're basically going to cause yourself stress next April. You're going to have to pay some tax at tax time, and seniors who are typically on fixed incomes generally don't like that experience. So what we usually recommend is to withhold some tax on it. We'll get to that in a second. If you program your withdrawals to be higher than the minimum amount of tax, there does need to be some tax withheld, but it's only on the amount above the minimum. but the entire amount is still taxable at tax time. So again, not a recommended way to proceed unless you've got a whole bunch of write-offs that I'm not aware of, or massive medical bills that you can write off, or if you enjoy paying tax at tax time, which I haven't really met anybody yet who does. The other thing that can help is that once you're 65 or older, you can split your RRIF income with your spouse. So Leon, for example, he can take his $5,400 and he can take $2,700 for himself on his tax return and $2,700 on Miss Leon's tax return. And so that's an option as well. Most tax softwares have a calculator in there when you get to this age, or most accountants will do it, and they'll recommend what the optimal split is to minimize taxes.
Just clarify on that. Do both husband and wife have to be over age 65, or just one of them to get the split?
Just one.
Okay.
The person who owns the RRIF, or the annuitant is the fancy pants word. And David, I saw you had a question there. I'm going to get to you in a second. It's a really good question, and sorry I didn't address it earlier. So what we want to do is, in terms of these withdrawals, we want to reduce your tax stress. We don't want stress, right? So make sure you ask your advisor to withhold a fixed percentage of tax on your withdrawals. Most cases, clients I see, it's 20 or 30%. So, if you just want to be fast and dirty about it, just pick one of those two numbers, and you'll probably be okay. But if you want to be a little more particular, you can look at last year's tax return and see what your average tax rate was. And you could use that number. And then at tax time, you'll owe nothing or very little in taxes, and it'll really reduce your stress. So again, make sure that if you're taking minimum withdrawals where no tax is required to be withheld, either be conscious and purposeful about the fact that you're going to have to pay some tax at tax time, or alternatively choose to withhold some tax monthly and then not worry about it at tax time. Personally, for me, the way I roll is I would pick door number 2. I would just have some tax taken off at each paycheck and then not worry about money. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to a question that David had here. David had a question: what happens to your investments in your RRSP when you convert it to the RRIF? Well, that's a really good question. Nothing. So essentially what happens, so let's say I'm invested in Tesla stock in my RRSP, and I have 100% Tesla stock. Not recommended. That's a very risky way to invest your retirement savings. But let's say that's what I did. Then when I convert it to a RRIF, basically you open up a new account and everything gets transferred over into the RRIF exactly the way it was. There's no tax to pay. There's no changes. There's no fees. It is just basically, from your perspective, it's almost just a change in account number. So hopefully that answers the question. Next, what happens when I die? This will happen to everybody, unfortunately, and regardless of how we try to avoid it. All we can do is defer it. So first of all, there's 2 different options. So first of all, if you pass away and you still have a spouse surviving you, what we always recommend first of all, you have to have a spouse, but for what we always recommend on RRSPs, RRIFs, TFSAs is you name a beneficiary on your account. What a beneficiary means is that is the person, it goes outside your will, doesn't have to go through your will, and the account will then roll over tax-free into your spouse's RRSP or RRIF, depending on the type of account it came from. So if I have a RRIF and I've named my wife Suzanne as the beneficiary on there, which I don't have a RRIF, but I will, then that money will roll over tax-free into a RRIF in her name. Very, very simply. And then she doesn't have to pay any tax until she takes money out, which is great. And then what happens if and then Eric, do you want to talk about this bit here on what happens if I leave it to my kids?
No, keep going, Per. I'll do the Q&A.
Okay, perfect. Okay, what happens if I leave the money to my kids? Well, it avoids probate, because we know probate is a 1.5% death tax in Ontario. But the full value of the RRIF, so let's say again, I have that $100,000 RRIF, because it's easy for me to do math with, and I have 2 kids. and I've put both kids as beneficiaries there, then they're each going to get $50,000. But because they're not my spouse, that $100,000 will generate a tax slip, a T4 RRIF slip, and will count as income for my estate's final tax return. And the estate will owe money. So what we need to do is, when we're thinking about that, and so now let's say my spouse passed away before me, knock on wood, and that doesn't happen. But let's say that happens, then when when that money gets distributed to the kids, we need to have a plan for how that tax will get paid. Normally, that usually comes from the sale of your home. So that's a great way to manage that. And I think I had one more slide, no, a couple more slides. And then Erik, if you want to take this one, you can, or you're going to do the Q&A, that's great. So then Erik's going to do the Q&A. What if I don't need the money? So again, we remember that the RRIF basically says again here that you have to take out a minimum amount every year. What happens if I don't need the money, right? What if I'd rather continue to save it? Well, the first one we often do is we'll save the money to our TFSA instead. And what happens is that continues to grow tax-free. You're allowed to continue to contribute to your TFSA every year. It's about $6,000 a year right now per person. So that's a great option, and we take care of that. It does mean you do have to pay the tax on the withdrawal, so you can't avoid that, but at least it allows you to transfer to your TFSA. As well, you could donate the money to charity. That'll reduce your tax bill, or you could gift the money to family members. So those are all choices that you can have.
And okay, we have a follow-up from David.
Yeah.
Which I can address. So he was looking at the second part of his question was with regards to gains and losses in a RRIF. So if you're holding the Tesla stock in your example, so David, the same would apply. The RRSP and the RRIF act in the same way in the sense that they're tax deferred. So it's not like it's in a non-registered account where you would have to declare any gains and losses if you sold or moved the investments. In a RRIF, the same tax treatment is applied as the RRSP. So you do not have to declare gains and losses while inside the RRIF. And then I think Marcia had a question as well on the TFSA. And Perry, you mentioned the TFSA as one of the options. If we don't need the money, we can transfer to the TFSA up to your limits. So Marcia, with regards to your RRIF and your TFSA, those are two separate entities. So your TFSA does not have a conversion deadline like your RRSP does. So the TFSA is a separate investment account that does not have the age 71 or age 72 conversion rate. So that stays as is, and it's in a sense a complement. So that stays as your savings account for any short-term money, or you can even direct the money from coming out of the RRIF. So hope that clarifies on both those fronts. Cool. Per, back to you.
I think Jeff had something he wanted to share as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I think everyone, or I hope you all had a good perspective on the theory behind RRIFs. And I think I'd like to address some of the realities or the more practical side of it, because, as a practice, we've had many clients successfully transition to retirement income from their earnings years. So I'm not thrilled with the term, you have to take money out of your RRIF because you're age 71 and the RRSP has matured and has to be converted. I think the term that we really should be looking at is we have to pay tax on the money that's in the RRSP by way of a RRIF, and the tax on that money starts at 5% of what's in the RRIF. We know that, if in your RRSP, for instance, it's not a locked-in retirement pension. You can take the full amount out. If you have $1 million in there and you decide you want to take that money out, you take it all out in 1 year and you pay the tax on the $1 million as income in that 1 year. So really, we don't have to spend the money. All we have to do is pay the tax on a very small portion of that money. And then you can put the money, you can actually leave it invested in the same investments, but in a non-registered account or in your TFSA if you have room in your TFSA. So then the issue becomes, and with many of our clients, they have RRSPs, they have TFSAs, they have non-registered accounts, they have pensions. The issue becomes, how do I plan for the estate in a sense, in a tax efficient way? Should I die and all of a sudden, either this, if you have a spouse, obviously the tax issue becomes a deferred issue because the money that's in your RRIF or your RRSP will flow to your spouse, and there's no taxes to be paid until your spouse passes. But if you don't have a spouse, if you're the sole survivor, how do I plan around my income needs? And also, if I have children or I want beneficiaries, that I don't have to ding them with a 50%, pretty much a 53% tax bill when I pass away, and whatever's left in that RRIF becomes taxable. So if you've been very good and you still have $500,000 or $1 million in a RRIF, and you pass away, that full amount becomes taxable in the year that you've passed, and virtually half of that becomes has to be paid in tax. So if like most of us, we were able to put money into an RRSP at a very high tax rate and save the tax at a very high rate. If we're smart about taking it or deregistering it, and we can pay tax at maybe 20-25% instead of 50%, and move it into another account where it still continues to grow in a tax efficient way, but not have the estate burdened by the full tax bill. So that's something that as a team we think about before we make any recommendations. There's two other points I wanted to make, and I know I'm speaking fast, but I don't want to take too much of everybody's time. The point that Per raised about declaring a non-spouse as a beneficiary on a RRIF is a very important one. And sometimes, if you have more than one child, for instance, and you want to make a child the beneficiary of your RRIF and the other children the beneficiary of your estate in the will, it's complicated by what Per had just said. Whatever monies are in the RRIF will flow before tax to the beneficiary named in that RRIF, and the other children who are beneficiaries of the estate through the will have the tax bill. So you have to be very aware of that when you're planning for your estate. And sometimes the right solution is to make the estate the beneficiary of a RRIF if you have just children remaining, so that there's no tax arguments about who's paying the tax. So that's something you can talk to your lawyers about, or your financial planners as well. And the third thing I wanted to mention was, if you have a pension, or either a government pension or a company pension, when you die, the estate doesn't get the money. It goes back into the pension fund. So some of the incentive for rolling over a pension into a LIRA or a LIF has to do with the fact that money becomes part of your estate. It might be a lesser amount, but it does become part of your estate. And if you have sufficient savings, sometimes that's a wise thing to do. If you don't have sufficient savings, sometimes it's not a wise thing to do. And the insurance value of having a pension that pays out regularly for that portion of your money makes sense not to transfer it into a product that you control. So those are the decisions that have to be made at the time based on what your net worth is and what your sources of income are. Okay, that's all I wanted to add. Please carry on, Per. And if you have any questions on what I mentioned, please just add them to the chat.
Thanks, Jeff. I think there's a couple of questions here. Eric's going to handle them. And then we've got a couple more slides, and then we'll do more questions.
Great. So Ariane and Karen both asked about gifting money, which is kind of point 3 on this slide, and very pertinent. So do you have to pay taxes if you gift money to a child? And is there a maximum if you gift money to, say, a family member or a child? So in this case, there isn't a maximum, and there isn't a deduction for anything that you would gift. So you still have to, if you make a RRIF, withdrawal, or you pay the taxes on the minimum amount, you can gift that amount, but it doesn't preclude you from paying the taxes on that amount there. So there's no, in a sense, no tax benefit from gifting, but there's also no limit. So if you do find that you do have to pay the taxes on X amount, but you still have leftover and you're not using that for your income for the year, you can look to see if you do have a child, for example, maybe that has an RRSP or a grandchildren and you'd like to contribute. Now that is a nice way to help them achieve that education fund and also for them to benefit from grants. So that is one thing that we've done for some clients and that we've looked at. So that is an option, but there's no offsetting deduction or tax deduction on that you can claim if you do give the money.
Yeah, so thanks, Eric. And sorry, this third point here about gifting the money, it's an after-tax gift. And I'm sorry if I confused people by putting in with the other two that are will reduce taxes a little bit. So sorry about that. Let's see, I think we've got one or two, we've got one more slide left, and then we'll do any other questions that you guys may have. So this is the case where some people are in a position where they still want to contribute to their RSP, but now they're 72. What do I do? Well, if you're 71, you don't have to convert your RSP until the end of the year you turn 71, so you can continue to contribute to your RSP. But there's two strategies you can use if you still have income coming in that you want to offset with RRSP contributions. So the one is either you do one final extra contribution, or you can use spousal RRSPs. And the extra final contribution, and this is where you need to talk to an advisor to help you plan this in both cases, or your accountant. But the extra final contribution, so in December of the year you turn 71, so that's the time when you're supposed to convert it to RRIF, you make an over contribution to your RRSP of roughly what you thought your RRSP room will be created this year. It uses your RRSP limit. You pay a 1% over contribution tax, but then you get to do one extra RRSP deduction in the year that you turn 72. And so, it allows you one extra year of contributing to your RRSP. The easier one, and that one requires a little bit of tax planning and usually a spreadsheet, which we'd be very happy to help with. The easier one is to have a spousal RRSP if your spouse is younger than you. So again, let's take the example where, I'm 71 and I'm now 72, so I can no longer contribute to my RRSPs. Everything's a RRIF, but my spouse is, 65. Okay. So let's say I'm 72, my spouse is 65, and I can open up a spousal RRSP for her, and I can contribute to that, and that will use my RRSP room, which let's say I'm still working, I'm Warren Buffett and I'm 90 and I'm still working. I can contribute to my spouse's or my wife's RRSP and still get that tax deduction. So that's a way you can get around the fact of being over 71. So those are the two things. Really what the takeaway from the slide is, there are some solutions if you have a younger spouse or if you do some planning to continue to get tax deductions. So this is the part where if there are any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Eric and Jeff and myself are standing by to answer any questions that you have. Hopefully Irina and Karen that answered yours. Either throw it in the chat or in the Q&A and away you go. Jeff, Eric, did you guys have anything that you wanted to add while we see if we get a few more questions?
Sure, I'll start one off. So Paris, say I was 68, 69, when's the optimal time to start thinking about this and to start planning? When's a good time to reach out and engage with your advisor? Any thoughts on that?
So there's a saying, which is the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. And then the second best time is today. So if you're 68, 69, and you're starting to think about RRIFs, good. I'm glad you're doing that. But if you could start thinking about your retirement planning, where your retirement income is going to come from before you stop working, maybe in early 60s, 50s, all of that, that's really where we want to start planning for that. So as we head into retirement and we start saying, okay, well, how am I going to pay myself? How am I going to pay my bills? That's the way we want to do it. So you either start thinking about it now or earlier, I guess is the short answer.
Yeah, and I think the other issues that come, or other options that come into play, are your CPP. We also get a lot of questions about, you know, I'm 60, I'm 62, I've retired. Do I start my CPP now? OAS, is that an option for me? That sort of thing. So Per or Erik, what are some of the thoughts that go into that decision?
So I have my thought on it. I'm just trying to find the slide here. Where was it? It's this longevity question. So the answer to whether you should take your CPP or not is if you don't need the money urgently, then the question is, how long do you think you're going to live? Right? So these statistics here say that, give you some sense, but how long do you think you're going to live? So are you going to live past 77 or not? And 77 is the magic number for that. The spreadsheet says that if you defer every month you defer CPP, the amount of CPP benefit you get will grow. And the spreadsheet says that 77 is kind of the cutoff. If you're going to think you're going to pass away before 77, then start taking CPP as soon as possible. If you think you're going to live past 77, which hopefully most of us are planning to do, then defer it. Don't take it before age 65. That's kind of the answer. Defer it as long as possible.
Yeah. So I obviously I agree with you. Yeah. I think, certainly my thinking has changed somewhat, because so many of our clients really don't need the CPP from an income perspective. Yep. And every year every year you defer it, you kind of get an 8% return. So the payout grows by about 8% a year for every year that you don't take it. So there is some reward, I suppose, for deferring it. At the end, though, by the time you're in your late 60s, it does make sense. Maybe early 70s, or maybe early 70s if you're still working, to start to receive that benefit.
Yep. Irina has a question. Is the beneficiary clause of a new RRIF account included in the form, or does it have to be added? Erik, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's something that we review generally annually, and we can add it at any point. So that's something that can be changed at any point. And also that we do, when we open up the account, we do have that included. So it's upon initial account opening, and then we can update anytime thereafter.
Yeah. So it's totally flexible. You can change your mind anytime you want, but it is in the form. Yeah. Erik, another question here. Is my RRIF withdrawal considered income for tax purposes? And can it affect my eligibility for the OAS, the old age security? So correct. Maybe just mention why we're worried about OAS, and then is it considered income?
Yeah, Marty, good question. So a RRIF withdrawal is considered income. So as Per mentioned earlier, you will get a T4 RRIF, and that you have to declare come tax time. So that will get added to your income. And it does affect OAS, and it does affect OAS because there is what is called an OAS clawback threshold. So if you're making, I believe it's more than 79,000 in income, I think it's 79 to about 120. If you've exceeded that level of income, your OAS will start to get clawed back. So depending on your other sources of income, if that additional RRIF income puts you into that 79 to 120 threshold, then yes, your OAS will start to get clawed back. So there are certain things that we can look at in terms of your retirement income to see if we can reduce that. But sometimes if you've accumulated enough money, that's a reality of things, and OAS can get clawed back.
One of the things that can help is the spousal income splitting. But we also need to be careful to not cut off our nose to spite our face, to say. So if we're planning to maximize old age security, it may mean that we're not taking out enough of your RRIF, depending on the size of your RRIF. If you have a very large RRIF, we're not taking out enough right now, and then we're pushing a larger tax bill onto your heirs or yourself later. And you may want to think about smoothing your tax bill over time, which is something that we can help with as well. Marcia, can you go back to the chart of deductions for someone who has saved money?
Let's start. We're showing gifting. Or...
Maybe this one. Let's see. Let me see if I can turn on. Marcy, I'm going to allow you to talk, and you can unmute yourself, and then we can try and find the right question for you. Just if you want to mute yourself and hop in.
Hi there.
Hi, Martha.
How you doing?
We're good.
Good. Can you just keep going back and I'll tell you which one I have the question on?
Yes.
Please. Okay. No.
This one?
Next. The one you just went past.
This one.
That one.
Okay.
Okay. So what I'm seeing here is the TFSA is growing because it's the light green one, is it not?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. So when you have to calculate your deductions, when you hit 72, you would subtract that amount that's showing in the light green there and do the 5.4% calculation on the blue part. That's my question.
Okay, so this is an example of an imaginary person named Leon.
Right, Leon, right? Yeah.
And Leon needs a certain amount of income every year. And so we've tried to, the software will optimize the sources of income, be it TFSA, non-registered account, or RRIF, to give Leon the smoothest tax experience over his lifetime and minimize taxes. So in this case, you're right, there's no tax on a TFSA withdrawal. So if I was to liquidate my TFSA, their tax-free savings accounts are beautiful for seniors because there's no tax on it whatsoever. The minimum withdrawal rate, which was that orange chart that I showed you with, it starts at 5.4% at age 72. That minimum withdrawal is based on your RRIF. So it's very specific to that account and that account number.
Okay, so at age 72 here, Leon's got, let's say, 150,000 in his TFSA. The 5.4% would come out of the registered part above that, right?
Yes.
No,
okay.
Sorry, there's no 5.4% on the TFSA. The TFSA has nothing to do.
I know, that's what I'm trying to get
yes.
to.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. So it's 5.4% of your RRIF. That's it, if that helps. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. Good question.
It might be, and you can correct, but it might be given that OAS is starting around that time frame that we're seeing the TFSA dip. Maybe in the scenario, I don't know the particulars, but before the client starts receiving that income, they're using their TFSA, and then we see the TFSA start to grow again. So that might be part of the explanation.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that's what the software has cranked out.
Right? Gotcha.
But everybody, the real point to take away this slide is that everybody's different, and the answer depends. And we have to sit down and do the math, and then go through the scenario with you and explain it to you in detail. So unfortunately, there's no magic number per se, but this one does tell you that don't go over 5%, or else you're in trouble.
Well, again, that's
if
it's your only source of income.
Yes.
And you have no other sources of income, and you want to protect the principal, ideally.
Yeah.
So yes. As Per said, and it depends. There's a lot of it depends, but you have the fundamentals, and if you're really wise about it, then you'll consult with the right people to make sure that long term you've made the right decisions.
Great. Well, I think we've taken exactly an hour of everybody's time. We must have been doing something right, because everybody stayed on, or people went off and made themselves some lunch and came back. I don't know. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Jeff and Eric. Thank you, Marcia, for your live question. And thank you for everybody else for your written questions. A recording of this webinar will be sent out to you. So if you have questions after the fact, don't hesitate to ask them, and we'll definitely get back to you with the answers. So everybody stay safe. It's a sunny day here in Ontario, and wherever you are, and please have a great day. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Per. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, guests, for attending.
Be well, everybody.